So, one day at a seminar, the presenter went to a table, and on that table was a wide-mouthed gallon jar and a bunch of fist-sized rocks. And he asked the participants how many rocks could fit in the gallon jar. People made some guesses, and he said, well, let's find out. And he put those rocks in the jar, and he said, now, is this full? And everybody said, yeah, it's full now. And he said, well, wait a minute. So he reached under the table, he got a bag of gravel, and he poured the gravel on top of the rocks and shook the jar, and the gravel traveled down and filled all the crevices between the rocks and topped off the jar. And so he asked his participants again, is the jar full? Now, this is a smart group of people, and they said, well, maybe not. And he said, you're right. So he took a bag of sand and he dumped the sand on top of the rocks and the gravel and shook the jar. And the sand got down into the even smaller crevices between the gravel and the rocks. And then he asked his audience, is it full now? And they said, no. Smart audience. He took a pitcher of water and poured it over the rocks, gravel, and sand, and then the jar was full. So, what's the lesson? What's the lesson about the metaphor of the rock, sand, and gravel and water about how we use our time? The lesson that I do not want you to get from this is that no matter how full your schedule already is, if you work harder and are more efficient, you can do more. I don't want you to take that lesson from this demonstration, because that's going to lead you to stress and burnout and all kinds of unfortunate consequences. The lesson that I'd like you to take is take care of the big rocks first. The big rocks need to go in first in terms of time, or you're not going to get around to them. In other words, those things need to be scheduled first. So what are those big rocks when it comes to using our time? Stephen Covey calls this principle the first things first, and that's the first thing to keep in mind about time, and perhaps the most important. We tell ourselves that there's always time for the important things, and we can put them off if we get too busy, and we need to schedule those most important things first. So what are they? Quality time with our partners, our friends, our children. Well, if we get too busy, we can always put that off. Time for our spiritual growth. Time for service that you're really called to do and that really satisfies and fulfills you. Time to exercise and take care of yourself as a body. Time to learn, the joy of learning new things and new skills. Time to do all the hobbies and activities that bring you joy. You can put those off if you get too busy for a while. But if you put them off too long, there can be really bad consequences. Your relationship with your friends, children, partners can deteriorate. You can feel empty and tired and burned out. And so the suggestion is to schedule those activities first. Give yourself an appointment every week to do those things. Be intentional. Because too many of us are slaves to the tyranny of the urgent. The tyranny of the urgent. Everything that seems urgent isn't important, but they will fill up all your time if we're not intentional and if we're not careful. And with modern technology, everything seems urgent. So we need to be really careful and make sure that those things that make life most meaningful and most fulfilling get scheduled first. So that's the first thing to keep in mind about time. Schedule the big rocks first. The second most important thing has to do with the fact that for many of us, our lives are just unnecessarily complicated. And if we're not paying attention to what our lives really are about and being intentional about our use of time, it gets filled up with all kinds of unnecessarily complicated activities and events. One more podcast. Well, yeah. One more Netflix series. Yeah, everybody says that's a good one. And let's talk about stuff. They say that he who dies with the most toys wins. Well, he who dies with the most toys dies, just like everybody. And everything we own takes a certain amount of life energy, time to use and maintain them. But even if we don't, even if they're just sitting there, our storage space, they still take a certain amount of mental energy and effort. The third thing to keep in mind about time is identified by Diana Hunt and Pam Haight in the Tao of Time. And they suggest that we control our time less and go with the flow more. That seems contradictory for what I said first, but what I really mean here is we need to have serenity with adapting to changing circumstances, and they are going to happen. If you have a huge to-do list and it's stressing you out, know that really only you can do one thing at a time. Make your priority and do that. Adapt to changing circumstances. Every day is not going to go the way you planned. So live in the now and trust. Trust that there will be time to do what's important. And know, and you've seen this in your own experience, there are days when things will go well, according to plan, and days when they don't. This is what Hunt and Haight call, there are plus days and minus days. In the Tao of Time, they even out. The fourth thing to keep in mind about time is that throughout the day, remember to come back to the present moment. And here, technology can actually be a friend. You can have a little alarm to remind you to stop what you're doing and take 3 breaths. Stop what you're doing and take a non-cigarette break. Stop work and go outside for 10 minutes. Notice the breeze, listen to the birds. Take a 10-minute office vacation. Take a moment to appreciate the food, maybe even say grace before eating. Try sometime driving 10 miles an hour slower. Well, maybe. Leave the office for lunch. The fifth thing to keep in mind time is to schedule spontaneous time. Again, a seemingly contradictory notion. Scheduling spontaneous time. We have an ancient example of this in the Jewish and Christian tradition of the Sabbath. That's 1/7 of the week where you're not doing and producing and creating and striving. My definition of a Sabbath is a day or 1/7 of your week, if spread out, if necessary, where you don't do anything on your to-do list. You only do the things that nurture you, that enhance your life, that you take advantage of the joys and pleasures available, that we rest. And finally, time for retreat. Time to slow down. It really helps to do this in nature. You know, start with taking all of your vacation. In the US, the typical vacation that people get are 2 weeks. But the majority of people in our country don't take all of the vacation they're entitled to. Step back and think about that. You have only so many precious, limited moments of your life. We don't know when the last breath comes. Every moment is precious. And yet we unthinkingly give away by not taking our vacation those moments that are under control that we could have. And we have created work environments where that's expected, where we're expected to give our time away, sometimes to soulless corporations or businesses. In Europe, the typical vacation is 4 to 6 weeks, and believe me, people take that vacation and they tend to be more productive than Americans. It's been shown by productivity measurements because they're not burned out. They have time to restore themselves, to nurture their relationships. Thich Nhat Hanh said, "We're very good at preparing to live, but not very good at living. We know how to sacrifice 10 years for a diploma, and we're willing to work very hard to get a job, a car, a house, and so on. But we have difficulty remembering that we are alive in the present moment, the only moment for us to be alive." Let's make 2022 a year where we're intentional about our precious time. May it be so.